We'd like to say good evening and welcome. I'm Bill Bryant. I will be serving as moderator for this forum for the primary candidates for the 6th Congressional District of the U.S. House of Representatives tonight. Welcome to our audience here in the Farish Theater in the Lexington Public Library in beautiful downtown Lexington. Welcome to those of you who are listening or viewing at home as well. Our sponsors this evening are the Lexington Public Library, the League of Women Voters of Lexington, the Lexington Herald-Leader, WKYT, where we're streaming live right now on WKYT.com, and WLAP Radio, which is airing this forum on a delayed basis. It will be available later by going to the library, the League, or WKYT websites. All candidates on the ballot for the 6th Congressional District primary race, both Republicans and Democrats, were invited this evening. Republican candidate Andy Barr declined to take part. We're following the League of Women Voters policies and procedures for this forum tonight. In order to give the candidates a fair chance to be heard, we've randomly drawn the order of the opening remarks and questions, and the second time for the order of the closing remarks tonight. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to introduce themselves. Round one, we'll use questions from the sponsors. Following the order of the drawing, we'll ask each candidate a question. They'll have 60 seconds to respond, followed by additional comments from the other candidates, who will have 30 seconds to respond each. In our second round, we'll use audience questions and give each candidate 45 seconds to respond. We may ask some short yes/no questions of each candidate as well. Finally, we'll give each candidate 60 seconds for the closing remarks, and we'll use the second drawing for the order of the closing remarks. Our candidates tonight, we'll introduce them to you, and hopefully you can see them on your screen. Daniel Kemp, who is running in the Democratic primary. Next, we'll hear from Theodore David Green, Democratic primary, Democratic candidate Reggie Thomas, Democratic candidate Jeff Young, Jim Gray, Democratic candidate, and Amy McGrath, Democratic candidate. And in the Republican primary, the candidate here tonight is Chuck Eddy. We will begin with our opening comments tonight. Again, 60 seconds for the candidates to introduce themselves, and we begin with candidate Kemp.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you're going to be hearing positions that sound comfortably similar. Practice generic positions that sound right because we already know what to do, what the right thing to do is. You're going to hear words like leadership and experience and common sense. And these words will be familiar and comforting to you. But the word you won't hear enough of is fight. Because whether you realize it or not, we are in a fight for what it means to be an American in the 21st century. The time for familiar and comfortable is past. We're in a fight for our generation's legacy and our children's destiny. Some of you already know which candidate you're going to support, and that's okay. Loyalty's a good thing. But many of you, you're listening in because you're not sure who you want to represent you. I encourage you to listen closely to the responses, hear the subtleties of the debate, and decide for yourself who you want to fight on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. And now candidate Green.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here, and we thank our sponsors who make this thing possible. Yeah, he's right. We will hear a lot of these words, but the one word we don't hear often enough is vote. I mean, we bandy it around, but there are a huge number of people that are registered to vote and don't vote. I strongly believe that these are some of the people that we need to be talking to, you know, as well as everybody else. The people who are already going to vote, they're going to vote, regardless. The non-voters, they need a little bit of encouragement, and I think that that's one of the things that should happen. Because this Congress and the Senate are the people who make up the laws. So this is a very important thing that we're doing, and we need to get people out to vote, and it just has to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, candidate Thomas.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank the League of Women Voters. I want to thank WKYT TV, WLAP Radio, the Lexington Herald-Leader, and the Lexington Public Library for hosting this most important debate. I'm Reggie Thomas, and I moved here with my mother and my sister when I was just 14 after the death of my family. Through my mother's inspiration and my own hard work, I graduated from the Kentucky public high schools here, Bryan Station in particular here in Lexington, Dartmouth College, and Harvard Law School. I am running for Congress because I think it's way past time that we have a congressman who serves the special interests and start having someone who puts the people first. When I get to Washington, I'm going to do three things for you. One, I'm going to implement a Medicare for all single-payer health care system. I'm going to bring an infrastructure program to you that's going to create jobs, and not just roads and bridges, but a 21st century electric grid and internet that goes across the entire country. And then finally, I'm going to increase the minimum wage gradually to $15 an hour. Thank you.
Thank you. And now candidate Young.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Young. I ran for this office, U.S. House of Representatives, in 2014 and 2016. This is my third run for this office. I am the only peace candidate up here tonight. What does that mean? That means I know what aggression is, I know what a war crime is, and I know how to prevent our leaders from going to war unnecessarily. What America needs most today is a strong, growing, and loud peace movement. It's urgent because there is an imminent danger of a nuclear war started by the United States and our aggressive policies around the world. There is one candidate up here who is actually a war criminal. That would be Amy McGrath. She served in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were both illegal, unjust wars. She's a war criminal.
Thank you. And candidate Gray.
Thank you, Bill, and thanks to our sponsors. What we need in Washington today is adult supervision. What we are tired of and worn out with today is the amateur hour. Now, I say that what we also need is people who have demonstrated performance and results. Yes, that's experience. Now, I've been in the private sector in a family business and grew jobs, recruited thousands of jobs to Kentucky, did the same thing as mayor of Lexington. But we fixed problems in Lexington. We demonstrated that we could come together, working together, we could get a lot of things done. We've got to get through the hyper-partisanship and get around and through the big money that is insidious, that is today corrupting Washington and is corrupting America. These are the things that by working together, we can all get done again.
Thank you. And now introductory comments from candidate McGrath.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who's putting this on tonight. It's very important that you hear from all these candidates, and it's important for everyone to come together and listen to the issues. I'm Amy McGrath. I grew up here in Kentucky. I'm a Kentuckian. I left home at age 18 and joined the United States military. I was a Marine for 20 years and retired and came back home. I'm running for Congress because we need better leaders in this country. We need a new generation to step up. We have hyper-partisanship, as Jim said, and we need people who can cut through that partisanship and really lead. We need an independent voice. And I think all of our candidates up here tonight, we all think similarly about many of the issues, but who is going to be the change agent? Who is going to be the independent voice who is going up against the establishment on both sides, on the Democratic establishment and the Republican establishment? And I intend to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now candidate Eddie.
Well, my name's Chuck Eddy. I am the token Republican on the platform tonight. Jenny Belander, when she was interviewing me yesterday, she's part of the Pound 120, the school group across the state, said that she thought of me as a unicorn. I'm not a unicorn. I like horses, but I'm not a unicorn. Basically what I am is I'm a moderate Republican. I realize that some of you may not realize that there are many of us out there. It's just that we seem to have rolled over too much for the extreme far-right Republicans that are currently in control of the national and state executive and legislature. Basically, my purpose in running is very simple. I want to return the Republican Party to the traditional Republican Party, the party of Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Dwight Eisenhower. People I respect, McCain, Collins, Murkowski. Collins and Murkowski voted against Betsy DeVos, as you may recall. Eisenhower had a high 91% marginal tax rate. Teddy Roosevelt started the national parks. So moderate Republicans have a place in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. And now our first round of questions, and again, it will be asked of each of our candidates, but the beginning candidate will have 90 seconds to answer and then 30 seconds to all others. We begin with candidate Green this round, and it has to do with opioids. It appears we have about 60,000 people a year dying of overdoses in this country. Local and state governments have been overwhelmed trying to respond. President Trump declared it a public health emergency last fall. Are we doing enough to combat addiction? Is there something you would propose at the federal level that's not being done?
Thank you. Yes, because I don't think that what he said was right. It is an addiction. It is a problem. But the thing that I've been noticing, I've been reading about and doing, I've been doing a lot of research on this, and what I found out is that there are at least 2 different kinds of drugs and a third one in testing that can counter, that can relieve this, can help people overcome this addiction to these opiates. I'm not sure why they're not bringing them forward. I'm not sure why they're not giving it to them. It seems that they think that the best solution is to just throw them in prison. Let them sit there until they sober up in about 10 or 15 years and turn them loose again. And the prison system is no place for these guys. These people that are on opiates, usually they're there for a reason. I think that the wealthy can afford these sort of things as recreational drugs. The poor people, the lower middle class, we've been pounded on for so long, and for so many people, it's their only escape from what they have to live with. They have to live with poverty, unemployment.
Mr. Green, thank you for your time.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Thank
Thanks.
you. That's all right. 30 seconds now for candidate Thomas.
This is a complex problem, but in the short time I have to respond, there's one fact I want to mention to people in the audience and to those listening. I've been a staunch advocate of medical marijuana since I came to the Kentucky State Senate in 2014. And if you look at all of those states, all 28 of them, including the District of Columbia, that have authorized and legalized medical marijuana, we have seen a 30 to 50% decline in opioid addiction from the use of medical marijuana. I think it's way past time that we, as a state here in Kentucky, legalize medical marijuana.
Thank you. Candidate Young, 30 seconds.
I agree with Reggie Thomas on medical marijuana. I would also propose making all cannabis legal, medical and recreational. Addiction is a serious problem. Marijuana can help prevent addiction. The war on drugs in this country has failed, has introduced violence and fear into what other countries treat as a medical issue.
Thank you. And candidate Gray, 30 seconds.
This is personal to me. As mayor, I have been with grieving families, those who have lost their children to overdose. Bill, you said it, you got that number right. 60,000 deaths through overdose across our country, more than were killed in the entire Vietnam War. In Lexington, we've been addressing this since 2013 when I first formed a heroin task force. We were seeing this coming on early. We then introduced Narcan and naloxone. And we've introduced needle exchange, one of the first cities in the country and the first in Kentucky. But this is a wildfire crossing our country today, and we've got to treat it like the crisis it is, and it needs direction at the federal level and help from there as well.
Thank you. Candidate McGrath, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'd echo what Jim said. Folks, it's not good enough for the President of the United States to call this an epidemic and do nothing about it. What do you need to do with it? You need to invest. We have had public health crises in this country before. We had polio. We had HIV/AIDS. How did we do that? We went after it using federal government investment in things like treatment, prevention, and science. Science. We need to invest in that again. It's not good enough to just label this and call it mission accomplished.
Thank you. Candidate Eddy.
One of the things I did last year was I went over to Andy Barr's office several times with other people. One of the reasons I'm running is because the attack on the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare without a replacement was insane, in my opinion. Insane, that's a strong word. The ACA includes mandatory counseling for access to counseling for mental health and substance abuse. That's key. We need to continue that, and we also need to have serious criminal justice reform. We have too many people in prison who are not in prison for anything other than they had a little bit of drugs.
Thank you. And Candidate Kempf on the opioids issue, 30 seconds.
The reason we need to approach the reasons why people are falling into this trap. We need the reasons vary person to person, and as varied as they are, we need to have a solution that's varied to varied programs at the state level that are matched with federal funds. But we also need robust, dynamic oversight by Congress on the drug makers. The drug makers know exactly where all of their pills are going. They have those spreadsheets, they have it set out, and they have their forecasts for how much they're going to produce and sell. We need to have congressional oversight of these things.
Candidate Kempf, thank you very much. Now, our next question is directed first to Candidate Thomas. The U.S. has struggled with a national strategy for health care for years. The Affordable Care Act was passed solely by Democrats in 2010 and has been roundly criticized by Republicans ever since as being too costly and meddlesome. Should the U.S. back off of government involvement in the health care marketplace, or should we move toward more structure, such as potentially a single-payer system?
Absolutely not back off, and we've got to move forward as a country and do what is best, and that is implement a Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare system. Here's where we are right now. Healthcare is 18% of our GDP. If we don't do anything, it's going to be 25% of our GDP in a few short years. It's going to bankrupt America. I am for a single-payer healthcare system, and people say, well, isn't that a radical idea? I say no. Because already we have 2 single-payer healthcare systems here in our country right now. We have the Children's Health Insurance Program for infants to 18. That's a single-payer healthcare system. We have Medicare for those 65 and over. That's a single-payer healthcare system. What we don't have is coverage for those 18 to 64. And nobody wants to go back to the time where you couldn't get insurance because you had something called a pre-existing condition. I say let's move forward and let's implement what works in other countries. That is a single-payer healthcare system that provides affordability and accessibility for all.
Thank you. Candidate Young, 30 seconds.
Since 2003, a bill has been introduced every 2 years in Congress, House Resolution 676. It currently has 122 co-sponsors, all of them Democrats. It is the Improved Expanded Medicare for All Act. I would sign on as the next co-sponsor. It is the gold standard for health care for all Americans. Other countries have done it, and it has worked very well for them, and that's what we need to move toward.
Candidate Gray, your response on health care.
Well, for the last 6 years, Andy Barr has worked real hard to replace the Affordable Care Act, repeal and replace it. I say it's time to repeal and replace Andy Barr. Now, we need to improve what we've got. We need to work for improvement and repairing where that's necessary. And we need to take the initiatives like we've taken here in Lexington, where we introduced a healthcare system, created our own healthcare clinic at no cost or little cost to employees, and prescription drugs being sold at lower than wholesale costs. These are ways, there are ways, and we can work on these ways by working collaboratively and together.
Thank you. Candidate McGrath.
We need to fix the Affordable Care Act, not throw it away, not try to undermine it. That's the fundamental difference between, I think, many of us up here and Andy Barr. Health care is a right, and we need to work in that direction. How do you do that? Well, I propose a public option. It was written into the Affordable Care Act initially and taken out. It gives people the choice of picking a government plan if they want to, and if they want to keep their private plan, they keep that too. Medicare buy-in plan, I'm for that, for those who are 55 and over. I'm for things like Senator Murphy just came out last week and said that he was for a public option type plan. These are reasonable things that we can do.
Thank you. Candidate Eddy.
So the important thing in Congress is for us to have more moderate Republicans and centrist Democrats. I will tell you this, I was absolutely opposed to the repeal and replace concept, and when they came out with this AHCA, it was repeal and gut. There was no replace about it. The United States spends an average of $9,000 per person. The average of the OECD countries is 1/3 of that. As a Republican, I'm trying to be fiscally responsible, and I say it's stupid that we spend as much as we do. We do need to improve ACA, and we need to move towards universal health care.
Thank you. Candidate Kemp, 30 seconds.
I absolutely do support single payer, but it's a pure fantasy to think that we're just going to magically sign a bill into law and it's going to come that way. When you talk about exiting $3 trillion from the market that the healthcare market is, that has to be done in an orderly, systemic way. And we can't just throw it at the system. I'm proposing that the government first has to have adequate administration of it by combining Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA, and prove that it can first work, and then have that Medicare option introduced.
Thank you. Candidate Green.
I support the single payer plan. I think it would work very well. I also think that we need to work on they threw out the ACA, or they tried to, because they said it didn't work. Well, it works, but it needs tweaking, just like anything else new comes out. And once that comes out, I think combine that, make that as part of the single payer plan, and I think then that it would be fair to everybody in this country to have the health care that they need and that they deserve.
Thank you. If you're just joining us, you're watching a 6th District Congressional Forum tonight, just a few weeks before the primary here in Kentucky to decide the nominees for the November election and ultimately who will represent the central part of Kentucky in Congress. So let's talk a little bit about the region, and we begin this round with the candidate Young. The 6th District is a true mix of urban and rural. About 40% of the voters live in Lexington, roughly. About 60% don't. How are you qualified to represent the interests of city dwellers and those who live in what many consider to be the plowed ground?
It's not in the interest of anyone in the 6th District, urban or rural, to allow our government to start a nuclear war or to push Russia to the wall to the extent that they go to war with us, and then anything could happen, for example, in Syria. I will help the people of the 6th District in urban and rural areas by preventing a nuclear war started by the United States. It is that dangerous right now. It's like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. What we need is people who understand foreign affairs. No one up here on this panel understands foreign affairs like I do. My qualifications are 39 years working in America's anti-war movement. I have opposed every unjust, illegal use of American military force for the last 39 years.
Thank you. Candidate Gray.
I spent half of my life in a small town in rural Kentucky. I spent half of my life also working in communities in this district, built more than 160 projects, a lot of manufacturing plants, and recruited thousands of jobs. I was part of the team that recruited Toyota and many of the suppliers here. What I've learned in that is that working together with people and working men and women. I just got the endorsement of the United Steelworkers this week, which illustrates, and which is what they said, that I understand the challenges of working men and women today in our country, in our district.
Thank you. Candidate McGrath.
Folks, politics is all about people. So is leading Marines. So is serving your country in the military. As a military officer, it's all about the people under you and the people that work with you. And so when you go out and when I want to represent everyone, it's going to be everyone, not just one county, but all 19 counties. And how do you do it? You do it by hard work. You do it by get out there. You talk to people. You listen. And you do it by having a leader who has character and integrity and honesty. That's it.
Thank you. Candidate Eddie.
So I've been involved in horses for a long time. I know that's not surprising to hear in central Kentucky, but my friends are all across the state, throughout the areas. I've got friends who are arch-conservative, extremely conservative, moderate, liberal, progressive. The bottom line is it doesn't matter whether you're in the city or in the country, you're still people. You have to deal with them. The benefit that I've got is through my involvement in the horse business, I've encountered a lot of different people and see their needs, both in the city and in the country.
Thank you. Candidate Kemp.
For me, the bluegrass isn't just city and country. It's a complexity. It's a complexity of the people I've met and I've talked to. And I have my choices of where to live. I work remotely for my job, and so I can literally choose anywhere I want to live. And I've chosen the bluegrass simply because of how much I love it. And like any place I've ever been, it's the people that define a place. I feel that I'm the best candidate for representative because I'm one of us. I'm one of you. I work to, pay the rent and go to grocery and get the lawn cut. I'm one of you.
Thank you. Candidate Green.
I'm not sure, we're talking about the separation almost kind of like between urban and rural. I think up to a point that's true. But I think the big thing is that there needs to be a lot of dialogue. We need to learn how to talk to these, the people in the different groups and bring them together in terms of this is what we need to do. This is why we all need to vote. So I think it's a matter of talking to people and listening to them and learning their language.
Thank you. Candidate Thomas.
I do that every day now as a state senator. When I'm out there fighting for the pensions, for the retirement security of school teachers, for our first responders, for our state workers, I'm fighting for both urban and rural people. When I'm out there fighting to remove right to work and bring back prevailing wage, I'm fighting for urban and rural people. When I'm out there fighting for telehealth and healthcare access every day as your state senator, I'm fighting for rural and urban people. I do that every day.
Thank you. Our next question is directed first to Candidate Gray. Elections. America is built on fair, free elections, but concerns about outside meddling and even hacking have been eye-opening. Facebook data was improperly obtained and used in elections. What should be done to address the issue of election security?
Well, first things first, the rule of law in our own country must be respected. The Mueller investigation must take its full course without interference, and that's essential. Beyond that, more monitoring, perhaps adjustments in regulations with the FCC must be considered. We must approach this like the crisis it really represents to our country, the threat that it really represents to our country, truly represents, because we've not seen this before. And these threats these represent real and serious threats to our democracy. And what's not normal and not normative is that we might even consider it less severe and less serious than it truly is today.
Thank you. Candidate McGrath.
Well, the only difference I would say to Jim's remarks is we need a 9/11 style commission to look at the Russian involvement in our elections. I think this is really, really important. The fact that Russia was able to come in and possibly hack and possibly influence our elections is something we can't take as Americans. We have to get to the bottom of it. And I'm very concerned that we're not allowing that to happen because we have one political party that is aligned with the president and doesn't want to go there. So
Thank
we
you,
need to come together.
Candidate Eddie.
Not all Republicans are aligned with the president, ma'am.
Good point.
Anyway, having said that, the
Just the
hacking,
ones in
the
office.
electioneering, Facebook and all that is a big problem. I agree with Mayor Gray that the Mueller investigation needs to be, it is Mueller time and we need to pursue it. Elections, here's what's very serious, okay? The ease of hacking our elections come from we have this 8 or 10 hour time frame. Ever since the year 2000 where somebody had hanging chads, I've been in favor of a 48-hour weekend vote. I also am in favor of automatic enrollment at DMV or whatever, and there needs to be more in terms of mailing and all that. We need to look at varieties of way to do this so we don't have one vortex where everything can come through.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Candidate Kempf.
There is such a thing as government overreach, and elections comes dangerously close to that. Each state decides for itself how to conduct its elections. Each state decides how they're going to count their ballots or what machines are going to be used. It is up to the federal government to issue guidelines and advise and participate in that, but the state has to decide for itself, which means that we, the people, have to decide for itself. It has to be important to us as a community. Yes, there has been meddling, but only as a way of influence. The actual ballots that were cast were accurately counted. We have to respect that, and we have to respect that for each state that does that.
Thank you. Candidate Green.
I'm not really sure how all this hacking happened. So there's some kind of a root problem going on here, and so far, as near as I can tell, the current administration is not working too hard at finding it out. Mr. Mueller is doing an outstanding job of working at that, and I'm sure he'll fix it and get it on the right track. But Dennis said it straight. It's that we're the people. We're the ones who vote. We're the ones who tell these guys in Washington what they have to do. They don't tell us what they want to do. And I think that's all kind of there's a correlation in there.
Thank you. Now to Candidate Thomas.
The Mueller investigation must go forward. And here's the problem now. Congressional Democrats have been pushing for a bill to make sure that Mr. Rosenstein, who oversees Mueller, remain in office without any interference. And what we have here is our own state senator, our own U.S. Senator, Mitch McConnell, stonewalling that. I think congressional Democrats need to continue to put pressure on Mitch McConnell and the congressional Republicans to say that we need a bill to make sure that the Mueller investigation continues and continues without any interference from the president.
Thank you. And Candidate Young.
Bill, the quick answer to your question about making elections more secure is paper ballots. They can be verified. 2, there is no evidence that Russia did anything to the United States in 2016. No evidence whatsoever. Never been presented. I don't believe any evidence exists. 3, big picture. The GOP today is the party of war and cruelty. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party today, the DNC, is the party of war and corruption. They stole the primary for president in 2016 from Hillary Clinton and handed it to, they stole it from Bernie Sanders and handed it to Hillary Clinton. It's corrupt.
Time. Now, we'll direct this question first to Candidate McGrath. Guns, high-profile school shootings like the one in Parkland, Florida, was horrible. Another in Marshall County in western Kentucky. They've rekindled a debate about gun safety in the country, yet the Second Amendment is an important part of American history and is enshrined in the Constitution. Do you support additional federal restrictions on guns or access to guns?
Well, I make no apologies that I support the Second Amendment. I'm a gun owner. As a United States Marine, I've shot all kinds of weapons, but I'm also a mother. I'm a mother of 3 small children, and I'm very concerned about their safety. I'm very concerned about Americans' safety with guns. You know, as a United States Marine, I couldn't touch a weapon until I learned all 3 safety rules and went through training. So I'm very concerned as a citizen in terms of gun violence. Gun violence in this country is an epidemic. And we need leaders who, frankly, are not bought off by special interests to stand up and do what's right. I don't understand why we haven't done things like banning bump stocks yesterday. I don't understand why we don't have universal background checks for weapons in this country that close all of these loopholes. Everything ought to be on the table. And we ought to look at age restrictions and how young you can buy some of these weapons. Everything ought to be on the table.
Thank you. And now to candidate Eddie for a 30-second response.
So the answer is yes, I do support additional restrictions. I'm in favor of the Second Amendment. It was written in the 18th century. I believe that we have the right to have and bear arms. I do not believe that it's an unlimited right. We need to look at restrictions on 20 bullet restriction on a magazine. We need to look at the elimination of the bump stocks and any other kind of handmade device. We need to suspend the sales of semi-automatic, military-style rapid-fire weapons right now while we decide what to do about them.
And now to candidate Kemp for a 30-second response.
The three things that I would propose to do on guns is a minimum purchase age of 21, a national data repository where we are recording the gunshot victims, where hospitals are recording this information so that we can start gathering data and getting our minds wrapped around exactly what it is that we're talking about for dynamic gun policy. And the last thing would be, I would support, is an accessory to any crime that's committed with a gun that's stolen and isn't reported, or a crime inside the house where someone is shot, where the gun owner becomes an accessory because of their ownership without a responsible gun ownership.
Thank you. Candidate Green.
I'm okay with the Second Amendment. When it was written, the Founding Fathers knew only muskets. They never, ever dreamed that something like this could happen. It didn't happen then, but it's happening now. The big problem is that you can do all the background checks you want, you can do all the whatever, set up all the laws. That's not going to work. You need to start figuring out, because so many of these guys that are doing this have had mental issues. And everybody, they're going around, we got to get the crazies off the street. How are you going to do that? How are you going to stop them from buying a gun? So far, you can't, and so far, to my knowledge, nobody's working on it.
Time. Candidate Thomas.
Bill, you failed to mention your question also Memphis, Tennessee. And that's the problem we have on this issue. We see gun violence played out on the American landscape every day. And I too respect the Second Amendment. But I'm proud to say I'm the only candidate who's led on this issue. And what we need, I've said three things. We need mandatory waiting periods longer than a half an hour, which happens now. We need to remove all military-style weapons from the public domain. And we need to eliminate things like bump stocks that change automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons, to automatic weapons.
Thank you. Candidate Young.
Your question, do we need additional federal restrictions on guns? I would say no. I support the Second Amendment, but the incumbent, Representative Andy Barr, has been supporting the Second Amendment not for Americans, but for terrorists in Syria. Since the day he went to Washington in January 2013, he has been supporting guns for Al-Qaeda, and more recently, guns for ISIS. I support the Second Amendment, but not for international terrorists.
Now, Candidate Gray.
Yeah. This too is personal to me. As mayor, I have been to the funerals of victims. I have been with grieving families. Today, there are more than 3 million guns a year sold through gun shows and over the internet without background checks. That must change. We must treat this as the crisis it is. And we must focus on what is achievable. Universal background checks, achievable. This is what we must focus on. The Murphy-Cornyn bill is the best legislation before the Congress today.
Thank you. And this question, first directed to candidate Eddie. You'd be a new member of Congress if you were to be elected and go to Washington. You'd be a freshman. What would you do to gain traction as a new member, to stand out? What area would you like to distinguish yourself in?
Well, the number one thing is I may be a new member of Congress, and would you please say when, not if? I would appreciate that, when I'm a new member of Congress. On a serious note, the three major concerns to me are health care, veterans care, and criminal justice reform. As a freshman congressman, you're supposed to sit back and, you know, behave yourself and not put yourself forward, and I don't know how to not do those things. So I will make myself aware. I will make myself a part of leading into those things. The reason I say veterans care, I've got a lot of military in my family. I've got a niece in the Navy. I've got a nephew that's in the 82nd Airborne. I've got a number of veterans. It's extremely important to me because they're not being properly taken care of right now. Healthcare is such an important issue, and criminal justice reform, I want to return to that. We have more inmates as a part of our population than any other country in the world. That's a sin.
Thank you. And Candidate Kemp.
Well, as a representative of the Bluegrass, I really don't see myself just jumping out in front and being flamboyant. It would be much more representative of what the people are. Methodical, intelligent, involved, listening. I would work to get on the committee assignments that are most beneficial to Kentuckians. Agriculture, mining, anything has to do with bourbon, of course. But I would do this because of the responsibility that I would have to my duty to represent the people accurately. It's not my duty to be out there in front and trying to make a lot of noise. It's to accurately represent the people of the Bluegrass.
Thank you. Candidate Green.
First, I don't want to be out there in front. What I want to do is take the issues of the 6th District, take the people's, the things that they tell me, this is what we need, this is what we want, this is what we hope to get. And I think that being a freshman in Congress, you don't get a lot of chances. So what you have to do is you have to know exactly how you want to write up a bill, legislature, and present it in a way that they have to look at it and they have to understand it.
Thank you. Candidate Thomas, 30 seconds.
I have to tell you, I take an entirely different course of action. I think when people elect you to office, like Congress, they expect you to go there and lead. They expect you to go there and pursue a course of action that's going to make life better for them. And that's what I'm going to do. That's what I've done as a state senator. I've gone there and really tried to pursue a course of action that's going to make life better for the people of Kentucky. And again, where I want to distinguish myself is in the area of health care. We need health care that's accessible and affordable for all.
Thank you. Candidate Young.
When I get to Washington in January of 2019, I will get onto the House Committee on Foreign Relations. All of our foreign policies need to be re-examined, reassessed from the perspective of international law. I will oppose anyone, Republican or Democrat, any neoconservative that wants to launch an aggressive war or push Russia to the wall. I will also introduce an article of impeachment against James Mattis and Donald Trump for war crimes in Yemen and Syria.
Thank you. Candidate Gray.
One of the reasons that the United Steelworkers said they endorsed me was because I get things done. I've been a leader, whether it was in the private sector in a family business and creating jobs, or whether it was on the city council, or whether it was mayor of Lexington. Getting things done means problem solving. It means putting a bear hug around problems, wrestling them to the ground. But it also means developing relationships with others. Now, yes, there are 435 members of Congress, and that means getting acquainted with people who share some of the same points of view and sometimes different points of view, but working together to get things done.
Thank you. And Candidate McGrath.
So I do want to be out in front. I do want to be a leader. We need somebody with an independent voice. That's how I will be different. Somebody who wasn't necessarily recruited by the party. Somebody who will take a stand, even when their party is wrong, and represent the people of the 6th District. Look, folks, if there's a good idea out there that's going to help people here in Kentucky and in the 6th District, I don't care whether it comes from a Democrat or a Republican. I don't care. If it's a good idea, I want to pursue it. That's the difference.
Our final question from our news partners now is first addressed to candidate Kemp for a 90-second answer. We have a very partisan situation in Washington where Republicans overwhelmingly vote one way, Democrats usually go the other. The 6th District is arguably not truly red or truly blue, but purple in its voting patterns. It's frustrating to many voters who think that elected officials should make their own judgments about issues instead of being predictably partisan. But parties spend money to help elect members to Congress, and they have expectations of their investment. Would you take a different path?
I am taking a different path. I don't owe anybody a damn thing. I haven't taken any of the party money, and that's been almost deliberate to a point. Being a candidate means you have to take divergent agendas. All the different people I talk to, all the different groups that I work with, everybody has their priority of their thing and they want to move together. So being a candidate and being a responsible representative means being able to take all of those differing agendas and mold them together and to accurately represent the people. I don't see how or why. I don't agree with our political leaders. We live in a democratic republic where we elect leaders to lead and we make them make the hard choices. They're not making those hard choices. They're not taking a stand. They're not taking their positions. And this frustrates me. It used to be that they would take votes on the House floor just so that we can see where someone stood on something, and they're not even taking those votes anymore. And this frustrates me to no end.
Thank you. Candidate Green, 30 seconds.
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question?
Partisanship is the question. Basically, would you go to represent a party, and if a party were to invest in your campaign in the fall, would that have sway on how you might do things in Washington?
No, it wouldn't, because it's, I mean, I said a minute ago that I don't necessarily want to be a leader, but what I really want to do and to be is somebody that goes in there and, I mean, you have to listen to the people, take their issues to Congress, but you also have to work with the people in the Congress. And I think that what would have to happen is that you would need to put forth a strong voice and make them understand that what you're saying is that this is what we need to do. This is what is absolutely necessary for the people.
Thank you, Candidate Thomas.
There is no question that money is the poison of politics, and it's gotten so that it's paralyzed our government. There are two things that need to be done. One, we must overturn Citizens United. That's one of the worst cases in the history of the Supreme Court. Secondly, we must get rid of gerrymandering. We must have districts that elect people who are centrist folks who can work with other centrist folks. Right now, we have extreme districts on both the left and the right. And what happens is people can't get together and work for the betterment of our government. Those are two things that must be done.
Thank you. Candidate Young.
Bill, I don't think partisanship is the problem in Washington. I think the problem is in many ways, we have only one party right now, the war party. Both the Republicans and the Democrats are totally dominated by neoconservative, pro-war people. When I get to the House Foreign Relations Committee, I will work with people like Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat, Barbara Lee, a Democrat, U.S. Senator Rand Paul, a Republican, because these are pro-peace people. I will work with them and with the peace movement in America. Thomas Massey also, and Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Candidate Gray.
Well, Bill, past performance is the best indicator of future performance. Here in Lexington, we actually don't run on partisan platforms or as partisans, and we've gotten a lot of things done. I believe that this hyper-partisanship that we've got in the big money in Washington is destructive and corrosive, and it's tearing apart our country. I would vote at the very beginning. One of the first votes I'd make is to repeal Citizens United.
Thank you, Candidate McGrath.
Well, I think money in politics is a very important issue. It's absolutely huge. As a candidate and somebody in Congress, this is a very, very important to me. And I think you have to look at which candidate is running and going to be having her campaign off of small dollar donors. You know, 75% of the donations to my campaign come from people, from small dollars. That's the type of candidate who's going to attack money in politics and the special interests, because it's absolutely corroding us.
Thank you, candidate Eddie.
By definition, a moderate Republican is kind of purple, not red or blue. The partisanship is horrible. Time was when Republicans and Democrats would have prayer meetings together, dinners, breakfasts. Rostenkowski and Reagan got together and got stuff done. I would be what I call an independent Republican. I'm not beholden to anybody. I will say this, that people talk about repealing Citizens United. I think it's horrible. It's not easily repealed. We need to not get ourselves, tied up in a knot about we are going to repeal it. That's not going to happen. It's a Supreme Court decision. If you're going to do something to the constitutional amendment, that's a tough do. Work together with the people on the other side of the aisle. That's my goal.
That's our time for that. We have time for another directed question, and we'll begin with candidate Green. We owe a great deal to our veterans, yet there are documented problems all across the country about the VA health care. The incumbent congressman has a veterans strategy group that he appointed here in the 6th District. How much priority would you place on dealing with veterans issues?
Being a veteran of the Vietnam War, I would put a high priority on it, because I am at the money bracket that can't afford all these, all this great insurance. So I get my health care through the VA. Yes, they've had problems, but who doesn't? So, and I think that, we would need to make them, to work with them and make a better, stronger VA. We've got veterans coming home all the time now with so many different problems. They need to be taken care of. We just can't wait for them or for the civilians to take care of the problems. So, we need to work with the veterans and the administration and have them take care of our wounded warriors.
Thank you. 30 seconds to candidate Thomas.
We do owe a great deal to our veterans. And when I talk about implementing a single-payer healthcare system, imagine the kind of quality attention that veterans could get dealing with veterans issues such as PTSD, as opposed to now they're having to spend so much money just providing primary care and hospitalization for veterans. If we went to a single-payer healthcare system, we could really focus specifically on veterans' problems and deal with those problems that would help improve the lives of our veterans. That is why, again, people, we need a single-payer healthcare system so we can do right and better by our veterans.
We thank you. Candidate Young.
We need to support our veterans and help them. I have proposed cutting the overall military budget of the United States by 50%. If the neoconservatives who dominate Washington have fewer toys to play with, we will get into less trouble all around the world. We will be less likely to start a war that escalates into a nuclear war that ends all human life on Earth. So I will support veterans. That will mean that we have to cut the budget for war and weapons by slightly more than 50%.
Thank you. Candidate Gray.
I just recently appointed a 19-member Veterans Commission to deal with how our city, how Lexington and the Bluegrass can do more to support our veterans. I visit the VA facility here routinely, and actually it's remarkable when I visit with patients there, how much they actually respect what is being done there. Now, we need to be very thoughtful. Right now, the leadership of the VA is in question, newest leadership, and it's an enormous employment with the VA, more than 300,000 employees, and that leadership needs to have experience with running a bureaucracy of that size.
Thank you. Candidate McGrath.
Folks, if you asked us to go to war, you have to take care of us when we come home, okay? That's the bottom line. The idea that we would privatize the VA or go to a single-payer healthcare system and that all of the veterans' problems are going to be fixed, I think you're doing a disservice to the VA as it is right now. We have a lot of very qualified doctors and people who specialize in the wounds that post 9/11 veterans have. And we need to recognize that. On the other hand, we need to not cut funding for the VA, which is what I'm very concerned is happening. And I know this because I just checked into the VA 6 months ago when I became a veteran, or a few months after I became a veteran myself when I left the military.
Thank you. Candidate Eddie.
So as I mentioned earlier, veterans care is very important to me. I agree it shouldn't be privatized. It needs to be led by a superior executive with extensive management experience. That does not mean Vice Admiral Robbie Jackson. He may be a great physician, but he's not trained in managing people. We need a high-quality health administrator, and I recommend a high-quality health administrator from out of the military who's been managing these things for a long time, not somebody's personal physician.
We thank you very much. And Candidate Kemp.
The issues and challenges that our veterans face are the same issues and challenges that we all face. Housing, jobs, job retraining, health care. We need to find a way that our federal government can prioritize the access to these things for all of our veterans, but we need to find a way so that we can all participate in these programs and have them expanded so that we're all realizing the benefits of this. It's not just a simple single solution. We're talking about millions of those who have put on the uniform and fought on our behalf. We owe them a debt.
Thank you for your robust answers tonight to those questions, and it is time now for our closing remarks from our candidates tonight. The candidates drew a second time. We had two drawings up here. Those in our audience saw it live, and those of you who joined us a little bit later, it happened just before we went live over our platforms tonight. This time the candidates will have 60 seconds, and they go in the following order. Let's begin with Candidate Green.
Okay, first off, thank you all for being here, listening on the radio, and thank you to our sponsors and to the library for allowing this to happen. I've heard a whole lot of, it's not really a lot of different opinions, comments, ideas. I heard a lot of great stuff. And I think that, it's these kind of people at this table are the kind of people we need in Washington. These are the guys that, are going to be the leaders. They're going to be there working with a huge body of other people, Republicans, Democrats alike, and with a very adverse administration. I think that what has to happen is that we do need to go in there. We do need to really strongly take these issues with us, because at this point, things are only getting worse. We need to go in there as literally a new generation and make these things work for the people.
It's time for a 1-minute closing statement now from candidate Daniel Kemp.
I'm running for Congress because I have to. Career politicians in D.C., they feel so far from me and what real life is. It feels like the political establishment doesn't want us to have a voice. I'm running because there are people like me who feel just as detached. It's my civic duty to stand up and add my voice to the debate because there are thousands like me who are not being heard. We worry about job stability. We worry about the nightmare anxiety of healthcare. We're worried about America's standing in the world. We worry about how much we're being left behind by the elites and the trust fund class. We can do better. We can have better representation. I'm asking for your trust and your vote so that I can be your voice and make sure that you're being heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next closing statement, 1 minute, to candidate Amy McGrath.
All of these gentlemen up here, and myself, we're all standing up. We're all worried about our country. and willing to put ourselves out there. And I applaud everybody who's sitting here. It's not even the issues that we differ very much on. It's about leadership. And we need a new generation of leaders in this country. We don't need more standard politicians. We need people who have served the country, who will put the country and the region and Kentucky above their political party. I intend to do that. My life has been about service, and my life has been about leadership. And I'm asking for the opportunity for second service. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing statement now from candidate Jim Gray.
Well, I'm often asked, why, Jim, would you run into a fire when everybody else is running away from it? I've been deeply rewarded by having the opportunity for public service and being mayor of Lexington. I often say, even on a bad day, it's been a great job. But I know that experience, that performance and results count. Getting things done counts. And it's not easy. It's not casual. There is absolutely nothing easy or casual about dealing with health care issues, dealing with opioids, dealing with prescription drugs, dealing with pensions that we had to fix just here in Lexington. These are the sort of leadership traits, these are the sort of leadership skills that translate. I've learned that over time. And we know from seeing what's going on in Washington what it's like to have amateur hour. We need adult supervision in Washington. We need grown-ups in Washington today.
Thank you. Our next closing statement is from candidate Jeff Young.
I started out tonight in my opening statement by calling Amy McGrath a war criminal. She didn't respond to that tonight. You as voters have a legal right to vote for whoever you want. Just as the Republicans in 2004 had a right to vote for war criminals George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, just as Democrats in 2012 had a legal right to vote for war criminal Barack Obama, who invaded Libya and Syria and laid waste to both of those countries, just as Democrats in 2016 had a legal right to vote for Hillary Clinton, who was the driving force behind the illegal destruction of Libya in 2011. But you don't have a moral right to do so. I'm requesting that Amy McGrath drop out of the race today or tomorrow and leave the field for people who are not war criminals.
Candidate Chuck Eddy, your 1-minute closing statement.
Well, I have to admit that was an amazing statement I just heard. I'm a Republican. I'm asking for Republicans to vote for me mainly because it's a closed primary. If you're a Democrat, God bless you. You got a lot of great candidates available. You've heard from them tonight. If you're an independent, you can't vote for us, but you can vote for the mayor. Don't forget the mayor and the city council. Basically, the reason I'm running is because the current holder of this seat, Andy Barr, doesn't listen. We went to Lafayette Town Hall and said, don't vote on the repeal and replace bill until you've heard from the Congressional Budget Office, or he didn't do it. They came out and said, you know, this is going to take away coverage from about 23 million people who were covered by Obamacare and Medicaid. He didn't care. He'd been directed to vote for that bill by his by his caucus managers. ACA would be dead today except a moderate Republican in this side of things, John McCain, went and did this. I'm a moderate Republican. I want to listen. I do want to ask one thing, Mr. Bryant. Would you make sure to announce about the Kentucky Town Hall on Gun Violence next Wednesday at the Lyric Theater? The kids who started March for Life are putting it on. That's very important to make sure people know about.
All right, I think you just did. And candidate Thomas, your closing remark.
As I said earlier, I'm running for Congress because I think it's past time that we have a congressman who's a prop for the Washington Special Interests and for Wall Street. I think it's time that we put you first here in Central Kentucky. And As a senator, state senator, my legislative experience tells you that I've always put you first. When it comes to your pensions, retirement security, I've put you first. When it comes to public education and protecting the right of all people to have access to education, I've put you first. When it comes to protecting our workers and the right to work and earning a decent wage, I've put you first. On all other issues regarding civil rights, women's rights, I've put you first. I'm Reggie Thomas, and I ask for your vote on May 22nd because I will put you first.
Thank you. Our audience has been very respectful this evening, but let's have a hand for our candidates: Daniel Kemp, Ted Green, Reggie Thomas, Jeff Young, Jim Gray, Amy McGrath, and Chuck Eddy. Candidates, thank you very much for participating tonight, and thank you to our sponsors, the Lexington Public Library, the League of Women Voters of Lexington, WLAP Radio, the Lexington Herald-Leader, and WKYT, all partners in bringing you this forum tonight. Be sure to vote in the primary election, if you're eligible, on Tuesday, May 22nd. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good night.